No matter how advanced AI becomes, there's always a good reason to know some English basics. And I'd love to just give you a full, free, 45-minute long English masterclass. If you've clicked on this video, probably you're struggling or you want to improve your English skills. So let's get started. The most important aspect in language learning, it doesn't matter what language you are studying at the moment, is understanding your why. Every time I'm meeting somebody new, I always start my lessons by asking this question: why are you studying English? If you're new on my channel, one of the reasons why I decided to improve my English, and this kick-started the learning of all other languages later, is the ability to understand and comprehend when other people want to communicate with me. I was at the airport when I was a teenager. I was the only person studying at school, and I was so frustrated because everyone at school especially believed that I was super talented with languages. I was good with English. My marks were great. So could you imagine my surprise and my shock when I was at the airport? An actual English speaker approached me to tell me there was a delay, and I could not, for the life of me, understand a word of what the flight assistant was saying to me. I felt frustration, rage. I was very confused because my school marks, my school grades did not match my abilities at all. In that moment, I discovered why I wanted to study the language. It wasn't for the grades, it wasn't for my teachers, it wasn't to get a good final school report at the end of the year. I wanted to be able to speak with people whenever the chance occurred. And I understood when I was a teenager that English was like the #1 language. And for me, not being able to speak that language in that context, it was a problem. I have made a not exhaustive list because I have a lot of students, but some of my most frequent or most surprising answers, I'd love to share them with you. I don't like my job. I want to get a B2 certificate to improve my position, get a better job. A lot of jobs want you to have a certificate like a B1 or B2 to prove that you can speak English. It depends where you are, obviously, but we'll talk about certificates also later in the video. I'm traveling to Zanzibar and I want to improve my speaking. I read articles for university and the majority are in English at this point. I want to help my daughter with school, with their homework. I want to understand people when I'm traveling with my children. I want to improve my working position. I never had good teachers, but I love the language and I'm curious. I'm studying English for me, for my brain. I want to improve my brain health. I like to travel abroad and I always speak broken French, broken Spanish. I don't know English. I really need it. And these are some of the students that I have. I have a 3-year-old experience as a teacher, a much longer experience as a student, as a learner. I meet new people all the time. And job, curiosity, traveling. These are the most frequent reasons why people want to improve a language. What order should I follow when I study? It really depends on your situation. So I'll give you a couple of examples. If you're a false beginner or you have studied English in the past and now you're trying to get back to learning English, to learning the language, it wouldn't make any sense to start from the alphabet. On the other hand, there are people who have never studied English, so they are true beginners. In my native language, the alphabet was pretty similar to English. If you're studying from a language which has a completely different alphabet, you need to start from the basics, no matter how boring they are. I had a similar situation when I've recently started to learn Russian, and I, in the past, tried to understand and learn Hangul. The letters, they are not to take for granted. Imagine language learning as building a house. You wouldn't start from one window on the second floor because you wouldn't even have where to put it. You need to build your foundation. You need to make sure your foundation is solid. And then you start applying brick by brick. You start layering everything that is going to be your base and your starting point to then accumulate all the following bricks. I imagine a person approaching Italian or French and starting from the subjunctive tense. Why would you do that? Perché? If you get a course book, maybe the topics are slightly, switched. When you get more books, you see one book starts with articles, one book starts from family members, one book starts, for example, with adjectives. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that you have the basics. Understanding what an adjective is, and then understanding the word order. So subject, verb, object. Understanding pronouns, understanding nouns. Starting to familiarize with the language and then noticing patterns. And that's where you continue growing. I believe the starting point is, okay, I understand more or less what I'm doing. It's not total chaos. There isn't a precise order you must follow, but you start noticing at some points that some things are much more important, and I build up brick by brick. When you understand your level, when you understand, for example, that you are at a beginner level, for example, an A1 or an A2, you can get different course books, you can ask AI or ChatGPT. You're going to get an entire curriculum that you could follow. You could do this with a table of content on a course book, you could do this on AI. There are plenty of methods. What I'm doing with French now, which is the main language I'm studying, I've understood that my level is between an A2 and a B1, more or less. Understanding this then gave me the freedom and the possibility to check different course books. I am currently using, for example, a Simil. Love this book. I'm using different course books I found also online. I'm using AI, I'm using YouTubers. So I'm following YouTubers who create content, which is A2, B1 level, and I follow their social media and I get constant input. If I am not able to understand if I'm talking about the present, the past, or the future, it doesn't really matter if I can recognize futur proche or another type of future. I don't know why people struggle so much with pronunciation, because I'm a bilingual person and to me an accent was always normal. Literally last week a student asked me, how can I improve my pronunciation? Because I'm from Rome and I know you are from Rome, Paulina. So how did you improve your pronunciation? Like, if I sound like an Italian person, how bad is it? And the truth is, my accent is not a standard English accent. I know I do not sound like an English native speaker. And that's absolutely fine. I'm not an English native speaker. I really like my accent actually, because it's a combination of different influences that I got. When we speak, we use different muscles. Here we have an entire structure and the vocal cords. Each language produces different sounds. If you are used to producing some sounds, for example, this is a chart for people who speak Slavic languages. If you're used to these sounds, then it's obvious that other sounds are going to be difficult. There are languages in which certain sounds do not exist. So for you to produce that sound, it means that you're not just simply studying the word, but you're studying the sound. You're learning how to move your mouth and your jaw. You're learning how to move this part of your body in a completely different way compared to what you've done so far. In exams, and especially when you're speaking and when you're communicating with somebody, your most important thing to remember is this word. intelligibility. You needn't sound like a native speaker, but you should be intelligible. When a person can understand you when you're speaking, and you can understand another person when she or he is speaking. When I watch a YouTube video of an Indian person or a Scottish person, a person from Vietnam or Madagascar, what's important is that I understand what this person is saying. Of course they're gonna have an accent because English is not their native language. That's absolutely fine. The ways to improve your pronunciation are different. For example, you could shadow. That's something I've done a lot at university. You watch a short video and every single word, every single aspect of the speech, for example, the link between words, the intonation, every musical aspect of the language is studied. And you could do this on your own, or you could do it with a tutor, so you get feedback. There are AI tools, for example, Elsa helps you practice with pronunciation. If you don't have the money or the possibility to use AI or to have a tutor, you could try on your own, but it's a bit more difficult to check. You could record your voice, you could listen to a source online of a native speaker and then try to compare, and in that case it's very, very difficult. Sometimes we don't hear the original sound and our sound, they just seem identical, but they're not. To a native speaker's ears, they are not the same vowels or consonants. Another good tip could be learning IPA, so learning the phonetic alphabet. And this helps when you're learning a new language because you get to read. Letters are a symbol, but they hardly reproduce the actual sound. How can you learn to speak with confidence? Speaking and writing are probably the most challenging parts of learning a language because you are producing language. They're active skills compared to listening and reading, which are passive skills. So you get input. As a rule of thumb, what I love doing is practicing as much as possible. Obviously, when you're a beginner, so at very early stages, you cannot expect to be able to speak like a native speaker. We start from short sentences. You learn how to describe your name, your job. You learn how to talk about your hobbies, your routine, and then you start adding in some links. So I love studying and swimming, but I prefer swimming. You start linking more ideas, and then with time you continue practicing this. You can do this aloud, so this helps also your pronunciation, this helps your fluency. With speaking, what I always recommend is practicing as much as possible on your own. If you can, at a certain point, it's good to speak with actual speakers of the language. They could be very proficient speakers or native speakers. You get feedback and you get to practice more and more. You have another person asking you questions, answering your questions, and there's an interaction. If you don't know anybody, you could practice with AI vocal tutors. I have practiced for a while with Lingua, and I was blown away at how good it is because it's so good. And again, if you have the possibility, you could, for example, practice with Lingoda or similar platforms. There are so many possibilities now to practice the language. You needn't go physically, to the place where the language is spoken. If you have the occasion, you could also travel to that place. But remember, you need to communicate and interact with the locals, because if you hide from them or if you speak with your friends and you're using your language, that doesn't help. You need to try. It's not easy to speak with the locals. It's probably one of the most difficult parts of learning a language, especially if you're a bit shyer or if you have a bit of social anxiety or imposter syndrome. That's very common. The biggest misconception with vocabulary is that a lot of people love to have these super long lists and just study 100 or 200 words every single day. Why would you do that? That doesn't do any good. Learn in context. Vocabulary is a pillar when you're studying a language. It's essential. And learning it in context helps you so much. And a lot of people fight against this because it takes time. I'd like to make a practical example here with this magazine. For example, here I see the word sommeil. So here I have a photograph and I see Le Grand Mystère du Sommeil. And I see a photo and maybe I'm not sure about the meaning, but I'll definitely remember this word connected to this cover. And then I decide to find this expression in context. Then I find here the article which talks about le sommeil. Un sommeil sous influence multiple. I understand all the other words. I understand under multiple influences. Le stress et le bruit maintiennent le cerveau éveillé. Éveillé, I know it's something connected to being alert. I understand that this refers to not sleeping when your cerveau, your brain is, for example, paying attention. It's awake. So I start to understand that maybe it's connected to sleeping. And then I have a look at the photo here and I see that here there is a bedroom actually. So potentially it could be sleep. All these different notes refer to being awake, stimulated, not being able to sleep, being energetic. For example, here we have alcohol, we have coffee, we have tobacco, then we have a window, the light of the day. All these elements make me understand that we are talking about sleeping. Also because then I see, puisque le sommeil est un état de vigilance réduit, it's a state of reduced alertness. So when I'm basically sleeping, and you might think, okay, but you could just learn sommeil and that would be it. But by looking at all of this, I get many new words connected to sommeil. I will remember this in a much easier way. Like if you ask me now, one of the plenty of words from a list, I don't remember those. But if I think about a reasoning or a context, a situation, it's so much easier to remember. You also get to see how the word is used, how it links to other words, and you start seeing collocations. You get more familiar with words connected to that. It's never just one word. Never. When you're beginning, obviously the vocabulary you need the most is high frequency vocabulary. So words you keep encountering every now and then. Nobody starts from extremely difficult words. And that's something I do when I watch a video, so a YouTube video, for example. I don't care how this is called because I'll never remember it. I don't even know the Italian word for it, and it's my first language. I focus on words I know I'm going to need to make real conversation. If you're talking about something more specific, when you get more academic or more in detail into a topic, in that context, it's good to know more detailed vocabulary, but it comes with time. At the beginning, you don't want to overdo it. If you want to learn too much, all at the same time, it gets confusing, it gets overwhelming, you could feel burnt out, and you don't want to risk that. How can I memorize irregular verbs? I studied irregular verbs in a very old-fashioned way. So I spent entire afternoons when I was going to school, and I had these never-ending lists, and I would just start repeating and checking. Drive, drove, driven. Eat, ate, eaten. Swim, swam, swam. It's very difficult because you need a lot of memory, you're learning by heart. The luck with these verbs is that they're so high frequency that at some point, if you practice English a lot, it's easy to remember them because you're using them all the time. If you don't use something, your brain eliminates it. It's quite basic. So your method, in my opinion, to learn the verbs really depends on your learning style. I used to divide them into categories. To remember them and to retain those irregular verbs and commit them to your memory, what you want to do is just using them, just practicing speaking about the past. I have 2 videos on my channel about irregular verbs. One is in Italian, one is in English. And basically I used to divide these verbs into categories because it's easier to learn chunks. So I start with auxiliary verbs. I take a good table and then I use different colors. For example, GHT irregular verbs. Catch, caught, caught. Buy, bought, bought. And this is good to memorize them. And then I always recommend trying to create sentences with them, because if you don't use them, I promise you, you're going to forget. If you get stuck at your level, what can you do? The problem is a lot of people don't know their level, and ignoring your level doesn't help you understand what you can do to improve it. Let's make an exercise. You take, for example, a B2 test or a B1 test, and you try to complete it. Or maybe you get a B2 reading from a learning book, a course book, and the B2 reading, for example, is going to be extremely easy. So you know you're not a B2. You should aim for a level which is above. If it's difficult, okay. How difficult is it? Generally, I tend to ask my students, what kind of difficulty do they find? If something is extremely easy, it's not good for your level, because easy is boring. You know that stuff. We need to learn something new every time. If something is so difficult that you cannot make head or tails of it and it's super challenging for you, demotivates you, it's discouraging, and it doesn't help, because if it's too difficult, there are too many aspects to consider. It's not good. I believe that you should be able to understand a good 70% of what you're reading or of what you're listening, because in that percentage there is an element of novelty which you get to discover from context, but it's context that you understand. If you have 30% yes and 70% no, that's too difficult. You need to use another language to understand all of that. But if you understand the biggest majority, then you can try from context to get a sense of what is included in the text, and it's brand new for you. If this video is too difficult for you, I highly recommend checking older videos which are a bit easier. I try to speak with a slow pace, I include subtitles, so the problem with my videos could be maybe just understanding the vocabulary. Obviously, if you're proficient in English, my videos could be too slow for you. Then if you feel stuck, another way to improve is you could try to make different exercises. For example, I always listen when I'm brushing my teeth, when I'm preparing food. I always listen to some content in French and I say, that's okay, that's easy. Then I take a book, I try to write, or I try to translate from Italian to French, and that's so hard, because I know that my writing skills are so much more below my comprehension skills. Try to change your perspective. You could use a different book, you could use a course book. Online you can find so many materials. Test yourself. A lot of people are stuck because they have no patience. So that's another issue, and a teacher will not be able to help you with that. It's very intimate. Listening is a nightmare. How can I improve? Listening is one of my favorite skills, actually. When you start listening and you can understand when you're washing the dishes or when you're walking and you have your headphones on and you say, crap, I can understand. I needn't read. In that moment, you have this kind of epiphany and you say, wow! A lot of dopamine gets released in that situation. I always recommend trying to avoid long videos, long TV shows, long materials. If you really struggle, you should start from short stretches of videos, short pieces, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Study, analyze those 2 or 3 minutes. You're studying a language. You're not fluent enough to watch a TV show. When I make listening lessons, 2 or 3 minutes of video are enough for an entire hour of lesson. Because what do you do with the video? What do you do with the audio? You listen to it. You get the vocabulary. You try to understand the pronunciation, the context. You discuss, you comment. Natural sounds that we make in every language. Each language has different sounds that we naturally produce. An Italian person speaking English is going to say, I don't understand. That's how Italian people speak. They do it in a different way. And when you listen to French, and when you listen to Spanish and German, and then Bengali and another language, you hear they do it in a different way. And that's wonderful, but it requires so much practice. I listen to French now every bloody day. I listen to at least 20 to 30 minutes every single day, and it never feels enough. I expose myself to the language, and each time I try to grasp some words, some expressions, and I listen to those videos after a while again. You need patience with listening. You know, I keep discovering new words and new expressions in Italian. And I live here, I'm a native speaker, I teach it. I love Italian, I read in Italian. Your brain prioritizes what you're using more and more. And I know, for example, each time I study English, I study French, I keep studying English and I teach it. But I know that there's always something that I could forget, I don't remember, or I've never even seen before. I just accept that, because if you're striving for perfection and if you expect to know every single detail before speaking, before trying, it's impossible. You'll never start. When I started with English at university, my English was much more broken and much more faulty compared to now. And I remember the professor saying, "Your English is very good." And they were surprised when I said I was Italian. And my genuine reaction was, but my English is not good at all, because I was comparing myself to native speakers. That's their first language. For me, that was my third language. And when you see that in that perspective, every time I speak, every time I read something, every time I prepare a lesson, I try to ask myself, is there more? Is there something new I could learn? Is there something new I could teach? And that's absolutely good enough, in my opinion. You're always going to encounter some exception, some local use, some traditional use of an expression, some exceptions. That's completely normal. And when you get to an advanced level especially, you're so familiar with that feeling that you say, that's okay. But when you start, it can be overwhelming. Don't think in that terms. Sometimes I encounter reels of people who teach French and they explain very advanced and complex sentences and structures and idioms. I skip it because I know I wouldn't be able to use them now. If somebody were to ask me, okay, tomorrow you're designing a new software using Python and you're doing this on your own. I can't code. How am I supposed to do that? It's overwhelming. And that's also a language. I cannot imagine doing that. And that's a skill you create and you work on with time. No shortcut. Unfortunately, it requires time. I believe the fastest way to learn is when you find materials you really like and you're not reading or listening to those because you need to study, but you want to understand what's written or what you're listening to. The most practical example that comes to mind to me now is when I was learning how to do makeup. I was so obsessed with learning how to use the right brush, a good technique, how to finesse my abilities. I was so intrigued by all the new creators and content, all the community, the beauty community intrigued me so much. I didn't watch the videos because I said, oh, today I need to practice English. No. I was watching that because I really wanted to see what that creator was talking about, how that product performed, could improve so much because I was listening to English every single day, hours and hours, because I was watching tutorials, hauls, how-to videos. When I had my productivity period, when I was obsessed with productivity videos, I started to obsess over creators, for example, like Ali Abdal, and he has quite a difficult type of English if you are not proficient. He's difficult to understand, he speaks fast, and I was listening to him at 1.5x. I was listening to him with a faster pace than his natural one because I got so familiar with his way of speaking. I just remember it was so impeccable. The first times I started listening to him, I said, wow, he speaks so nicely. And then I was so caught up on the productivity, trend. I wanted to be super fast, super productive. So in my opinion, the best way is to find stuff you love. And that's what I always tell my students. I always try to ask about their hobbies, what they enjoy, what type of exercises they prefer, because studying a language is not something against you. It really depends on what you want to achieve. There are some universities, some academias, some businesses that will accept, for example, IELTS only. IELTS is a very difficult exam, and the aspect of IELTS that triggers a lot of people is the short period of validity of the exam. The certificate is valid for 2 years. I had a similar kind of certificate myself for French. I don't remember now the name of the certificate, but it was about French and tourism. I did it at university and now it has expired. And rightfully so, I forgot basically all of it. Then there are certificates which are lifelong, for example, the Cambridge one. And the Cambridge one is tough. I'm preparing people for the B2, so the first exam, and then I'm preparing for the CAE, so the C1, and they are tricky, they're challenging, but that certificate is solid. There are even more certificates. Always make sure that that certificate is something you actually need, something that is required and will serve your purpose, because some certificates, they are not that easy to obtain. They cost money. They cost a lot of energies, preparation. A lot of people stress over them. There are so many accents in English that a lot of students just get surprised every time I share a recording because they say, what accent is this? This is not British. I always say that in the United States there is, the standard American accent, but it really depends where you're going. And the same with United Kingdom. You could go to Scotland, you could go to a part of London and then another part of London, and then to Manchester and then to Wales, and the accent is going to vary so much. I always recommend when you're watching, when you're listening to something, try to make sure you know what accent or what the origin of that person is, what accent he or she is using. Try to make sure you know what you're familiar with, because some people don't know that they're always hearing track, 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 that's a track, that's a track, that's a track. Then they go to the United Kingdom, they go to London, they hear, oh, that's a lorry, lift, elevator, color, color. For example, what's your favorite color? I'm not very fond of it, so I don't use it. Usually, I highly recommend a website which is ENQUIRIES. It's one of the websites I always tell my students to check when they have a doubt, because in that website you can write a word and basically you get the YouTube videos that have that word said by a native speaker, and you can choose the accent you prefer. And let's not forget that English is spoken also by Australian people, people from New Zealand, people from South Africa. There is Irish accent, Scottish accent. When you're writing an exam, please be careful not to mix. It's okay if you start using one accent. So for example, I recognize that my favorite color is, and even the elevator and the cookies I baked with my sister were that color. It's okay if you're doing this, but you cannot mix it up with, I recognize that my favorite theater is in the center. This is British. Confusing. You show how confused you are. So, alright, so we got to the end of the video. Let me know if you like this format. I'd love to film a part 2. I have so many other questions. So let me know if you like this content, if I should plan a second part. Let me know in the comments. If you have any questions, write them in the comments. They will be included in part 2. Thank you so much for all your support. I'll see you next time.